During the 14th–17th century bubonic plague outbreaks that killed millions across Europe, plague doctors wore one of history's most haunting medical costumes. The iconic beaked mask, resembling a bird's head, contained aromatic herbs, spices, and vinegar-soaked sponges in the elongated nose roses, mint, camphor, cloves. Physicians believed miasma theory. Disease spread through foul air, and sweet smells provided protection. The costume included a floor-length waxed leather or canvas overcoat, leather gloves, boots, and a wide-brimmed hat, identifying them as medical practitioners. Glass goggles protected eyes from contamination. Some carried wooden canes to examine patients without direct contact, lifting clothing or moving bodies. The outfit was terrifying to plague victims, who saw these bird-like figures as harbingers of death. Ironically, the costume provided minimal protection. Plague spreads through flea bites and respiratory droplets, not bad air. The thick clothing may have offered slight barrier protection, but doctors routinely contracted plague and died. They performed gruesome tasks, lancing buboes, swollen lymph nodes to drain pus, bloodletting, and recording deaths. Many plague doctors were second-rate physicians or untrained individuals, willing to accept the high-mortality job for substantial payment. Their presence in a neighborhood signaled mass death was occurring, making the beaked silhouette synonymous with epidemic horror throughout medieval Europe. On March 31, 1993, Brandon Lee, son of martial arts legend Bruce Lee, was killed on the set of The Crow in Wilmington, North Carolina. In a preventable tragedy involving negligent prop gun safety, the production used real firearms modified to fire blanks. Earlier in filming, a scene required close-ups, showing bullets in a gun cylinder. Prop master removed gunpowder from live rounds but left the primer caps, which contain enough explosive to dislodge bullets. When triggered, a primer fired, lodging a bullet fragment in the barrel and noticed by the crew. Days later, during Brandon Lee's death scene, actor Michael Massey fired the same gun, loaded with full power blanks, at Lee from approximately 15 feet away. The blank's explosive force propelled the launched bullet fragment out at lethal velocity, striking Lee in the abdomen and lodging beside his spine. He was rushed to surgery, but died after 6 hours, aged 28. The death was ruled accidental, resulting from a chain of safety violations: improper ammunition handling, failure to inspect firearms between uses, and inadequate supervision. The film was completed using computer effects and a double, becoming both Brandon's memorial and a dark reminder of Hollywood's sometimes fatal safety failures. The Japanese kamikaze divine wind attacks began in October 1944 as American forces advanced toward Japan. Approximately 3,860 kamikaze pilots died crashing explosive-laden aircraft into Allied ships during the war's final 10 months, killing roughly 4,900 Allied sailors. Pilots, often barely trained teenagers, were given methamphetamine before missions to overcome fear. They wore ceremonial headbands, carried samurai swords, and participated in final ceremonies where they drank sake and wrote farewell letters. Many were university students pressured by military culture that glorified death for the emperor. Pilots aimed for aircraft carriers and capital ships, diving at 300 to 400 miles per hour. When successful, explosions would tear through steel decks, igniting ammunition and fuel, trapping sailors in infernos below deck. The USS Bunker Hill lost 346 crew members from a single kamikaze strike. Survivors described the psychological horror of watching planes deliberately crash into their ships, knowing pilots chose certain death. American sailors developed severe trauma from kamikaze attacks. The conventional enemy tried to survive. Kamikazes sought death, making them unpredictable and terrifying. Japan's military leadership viewed the program as maximizing damage with minimal resources, trading one life and one plane for potentially thousands of enemy casualties. Lord Carnarvon, the British aristocrat who funded Howard Carter's excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, died on April 5, 1923, just months after the tomb's opening. The official cause was blood poisoning from an infected mosquito bite on his cheek, which he reopened while shaving, leading to septicemia and pneumonia. His death at Cairo's Continental Hotel was dramatic. Lights allegedly failed throughout the city at the moment of death, and his dog in England reportedly howled and died simultaneously. Media sensationalized his death as the curse of the pharaohs, though no ancient curse was actually inscribed in the tomb. The curse narrative intensified as other expedition members died. Carnarvon's half-brother died suddenly, an associate committed self-harm, and Carter's secretary died under mysterious circumstances. However, statistical analysis reveals most excavation team members lived normal lifespans. Howard Carter himself died at 64 in 1939, 16 years after opening the tomb. The curse legend likely originated from a combination of coincidental deaths, media fabrication, and colonial-era fascination with Egyptian mysticism. Nevertheless, Carnarvon's death from a trivial infection remains eerily timed, occurring just months after disturbing a 3,000-year-old burial. On September 13, 1916, Mary, a 5-ton Asian elephant with the Sparks world-famous show's circus, killed her trainer Walter Red Eldridge in Kingsport, Tennessee. After he reportedly prodded her behind the ear with a hook, Mary grabbed him with her trunk, threw him against a wall, then stepped on his head, crushing his skull. Witnesses demanded the elephant's death, with crowds threatening to burn down the circus if Mary wasn't executed. Local authorities refused to hang her, so circus owner Charlie Sparks arranged her execution in nearby Irwin, where a railroad crane was available. On September 13, 1916, approximately 2,500 spectators gathered as workers chained Mary by the neck to an industrial crane. On the first attempt, the chain snapped, and Mary fell, breaking her hip. Screaming in agony, she was rechained and hoisted again, slowly strangling as the crowd watched. The hanging took several minutes, as Mary's massive weight required the chain to slowly crush her windpipe. Photographs of Mary's corpse, dangling from the crane, became infamous. The execution reflected early 20th century attitudes toward circus animals and remains one of history's most disturbing examples of animal cruelty. Aum Shinrikyo, led by partially blind guru Shoko Asahara, evolved from a yoga group into a terrorist organization that perpetrated Japan's deadliest domestic terror attack. On March 20th, 1995, cult members released sarin nerve gas in Tokyo's subway system during rush hour, killing 13 and injuring over 6,000. Attackers punctured plastic bags of liquid sarin with sharpened umbrella tips before fleeing. Victims collapsed, convulsing, foaming at the mouth, and bleeding from facial orifices as the organophosphate compound disrupted their nervous systems. Many survivors suffered permanent neurological damage. Less known is that Aum Shinrikyo had previously attempted at least 9 other biological and chemical attacks, including releasing botulinum toxin near the Imperial Palace and spraying anthrax from a rooftop, all of which failed due to incompetence. The cult operated laboratories, purchased Russian military helicopters, manufactured automatic weapons, and even attempted to acquire nuclear weapons. Asahara convinced followers that mass murder would trigger enlightenment and prevent a prophesied apocalyptic war. OEM's wealth, estimated at $1 billion, funded these operations. Asahara was executed in 2018, but the cult still exists under different names, with hundreds of followers in Japan. Napoleon Bonaparte died on May 5, 1821, on St. Helena, officially from stomach cancer. However, forensic analysis of his preserved hair in the 1960s revealed arsenic levels 100 times normal concentrations, spawning theories he was slowly poisoned during exile. The most intriguing hypothesis suggests his Longwood House wallpaper, featuring Scheele's green pigment containing copper, arsenite, released toxic arsenic vapors in St. Helena's humid climate. Fungal growth on damp wallpaper converted copper arsenite into trimethylacene gas, which Napoleon would have inhaled constantly. His symptoms: gastric pain, weakness, swollen legs, hair loss, match chronic arsenic poisoning better than stomach cancer. Samples of his wallpaper, preserved in museums, still contain dangerous arsenic levels. Alternatively, some historians argue political rivals administered arsenic deliberately. Counterarguments note that Napoleonic-era hair treatments contained arsenic, explaining contamination, and autopsy reports describe a cancerous stomach. The debate continues, with modern forensic scientists divided, whether killed by treacherous decor, murderous enemies, or natural disease. Napoleon's death remains suspicious. His body remarkably well preserved when exhumed in 1840 after 19 years. Suggested arsenic's preservative effects, another clue supporting poison over cancer. While the document references Vasco Nuñez de Balboa's 1513 Pacific expedition, historical records actually attribute scurvy's most devastating toll to other voyages. Scurvy, caused by vitamin C deficiency, was maritime exploration's most feared killer, claiming more lives than storms, combat, or shipwreck combined. During long voyages, sailors surviving months without fresh produce experienced a progression of horror. First, lethargy and sadness. Then, skin bruising and bleeding gums. As the disease advanced, old wounds reopened spontaneously. Bones previously broken would refracture, and teeth loosened and fell out. The gums swelled grotesquely, turning black and emitting foul odors. Victims developed massive hemorrhages under the skin, their bodies turning purple and black. In final stages, sailors became too weak to move, bleeding internally, their bodies literally falling apart, as collagen, which requires vitamin C to... Some expeditions lost 80 to 90% of crews. Magellan's circumnavigation reportedly saw sailors gnawing leather and eating rats before dying. The disease was particularly cruel because it was entirely preventable with citrus fruits. But this cure wasn't widely understood or implemented until the 18th century. Mayan rulers performed elaborate bloodletting ceremonies as essential communication with deities and the spirit world, subjecting themselves to excruciating pain as religious duty. Royal blood was considered sacred, containing kale divine essence, making its sacrifice particularly powerful. Kings and queens would pierce their tongues, earlobes, and genitals with stingray spines, obsidian blades, or knotted cords embedded with thorns. For tongue bloodletting, a barbed cord was pulled through the perforation repeatedly, maximizing blood flow and agony. The blood was collected on bark paper, which was then burned, with smoke serving as messenger to gods. Carved stone reliefs depict rulers in the act. Lady Zak of Yaxchilan is shown pulling a thorned rope through her tongue while experiencing hallucinogenic visions. These ceremonies often occurred during important astronomical events, particularly concerning Venus. The pain was intentional suffering, demonstrated royal devotion, and induced trance, states enhanced by consuming hallucinogenic substances. Multiple bloodletting events occurred monthly, meaning rulers repeatedly subjected themselves to deliberate mutilation throughout their reigns. Archaeologists have found bloodletting instruments in royal tombs, confirming the practice's centrality. On May 6, 1937, the German passenger airship LZ-129 Hindenburg caught fire while attempting to dock in Lakehurst, New Jersey, killing 36 of the 97 people aboard. The disaster unfolded in just 34 seconds, captured in film and radio broadcast by Herbert Morrison, whose voice, breaking with emotion, "Oh, the humanity," became iconic. The massive airship, filled with 7 million cubic feet of flammable hydrogen, ignited from its tail, and flames raced through the vessel at terrifying speed. Passengers and crew faced horrific choices: stay inside the inferno or jump 200 feet to the ground. Some survived by jumping. Others burned alive, trapped in their compartments. Witnesses described screaming passengers visible through windows as flames consumed them. The intense heat melted metal, and victims' bodies were carbonized beyond recognition. One survivor recalled the skin on his hands melting off as he climbed out. The disaster was filmed and photographed extensively, showing people fleeing the fireball, some with clothes burning. The Hindenburg's destruction effectively ended the airship era and became synonymous with technological disaster and hubris. On April 5, 1994, Nirvana frontman Kurt Cobain self-inflicted a fatal shotgun wound to his head at his Seattle home. He was discovered 3 days later by an electrician, his body significantly decomposed. The scene was gruesome. Cobain had injected approximately 3 times the lethal dose of heroin before placing a 20-gauge shotgun in his mouth and pulling the trigger. A note addressed to his childhood imaginary friend Bada lay nearby, expressing his inability to feel the music anymore and his belief that his death would be better for his family than continued life. The suicide note contained the haunting line about how it's better to burn out than fade away. Quoting Neil Young, Cobain's wife, Courtney Love, was in rehab when he died. At 27, Cobain joined the notorious 27 Club of musicians who died at that age. His death sent shockwaves through popular culture, with copycat self-harm incidents reported worldwide. The circumstances remain controversial. Conspiracy theorists question whether his heroin levels would have allowed him physical capability to pull the trigger, though medical examiners confirmed it was. The 1918 Spanish flu pandemic killed an estimated 50 to 100 million people globally, creating demographic catastrophes visible in census data decades later. Unlike typical influenza strains that kill the elderly and very young, the 1918 flu disproportionately killed healthy adults, aged 20 to 40, the prime reproductive years. Census records show dramatic notches, sharp declines in birth rates corresponding to 1918. 1919, as pregnant women died, prospective parents perished before conceiving, and survivors were too sick or traumatized to reproduce. Some countries lost 5 to 10% of their young adult population within months. The pandemic created a missing generation. Children who would have been born in 1918-1919 were never conceived because their potential parents died. This baby bust appears in population pyramids as a distinct indentation, affecting labor forces and demographics through the 20th century. Additionally, research suggests the flu caused long-term health problems in survivors and their offspring. Children born during pandemic years showed increased rates of disability, cardiovascular disease, and reduced economic outcomes throughout their lives. The 1918 flu fundamentally altered human population structure, with effects rippling through generations. The Ottoman Empire institutionalized royal murder through the law of fratricide, which Sultan Mehmed II officially codified in the 15th century. Whichever of my sons inherits the sultanate, it behooves him to kill his brothers in the interest of world order. This policy aimed to prevent civil wars by eliminating potential rival claimants. Upon ascending the throne, new sultans would have all brothers strangled with silk cords, a method considered more noble than shedding royal blood. The most notorious example occurred in 1595, when Mehmed III ordered the execution of his 19 brothers, ranging from infants to adults, all strangled on a single day. Their pregnant concubines were drowned. Some sultans imprisoned brothers instead, keeping them in the caliph's cage, luxurious but isolated quarters where princes lived under house arrest with sterilized concubines, slowly going insane from isolation. Sultan Ibrahim, released from the cage after 22 years when his brother died, was reportedly so traumatized he didn't believe he was truly sultan and suspected assassination plots. The fratricide law was officially abandoned in the 17th century in favor of imprisonment. but had already resulted in hundreds of royal murders. Belle Gunness, standing nearly 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds, murdered an estimated 40 people between 1884 and 1908 at her Indiana farm. She specialized in killing lonely men who responded to her matrimonial advertisements promising love and partnership. Victims arrived with life savings after Gunness requested they prove financial solvency. Within weeks, they disappeared. Gunness poisoned them with strychnine, bludgeoned them with axes, or killed them in their sleep before dismembering bodies and feeding remains to her hogs or burying them around her property. She collected substantial life insurance on 2 husbands and several children who died under suspicious circumstances. In 1908, her farmhouse burned down, and investigators discovered a headless female corpse in the ruins, along with the remains of her children. The body was too small to be Gunness, suggesting she faked her death. Excavations of her property unearthed dozens of body parts, watches, and personal effects from missing men. Sightings of Gunness persisted for decades across multiple states, but she was never captured. Her case inspired the term Black Widow Killer for women who murder multiple partners. The Chernobyl exclusion zone, evacuated after the 1986 nuclear disaster, has become an accidental laboratory for studying radiation's effects on wildlife across generations. Contrary to the claim about mutant animals with extra heads, scientific research reveals more subtle but disturbing effects. Birds have smaller brains, reduced cognitive abilities, and abnormal plumage coloration. Insects show significantly reduced lifespans and populations. Barn swallows exhibit increased rates of tumors and partial albinism patches of white feathers, indicating melanin production disruption. Some species show elevated mutation rates in their DNA, but not the dramatic physical deformities often claimed. Trees in the red forest, closest to the reactor, turned rust-colored and died immediately from acute radiation exposure. They remained standing, too radioactive for normal decomposition. Soil microorganisms responsible for decay died, leaving fallen leaves unnaturally preserved. Larger mammals, like wolves and wild boar, have repopulated the zone not because radiation is safe, but because human absence outweighs radiation danger. These animals carry radioactive cesium and strontium in their tissues. The zone serves as grim evidence that wildlife can persist in toxic environments humans cannot tolerate. On March 26, 1997, 39 members of the Heaven's Gate cult were discovered dead in a Rancho Santa Fe mansion. Victims of coordinated self-harm orchestrated by leader Marshall App. The group believed a spacecraft hiding behind Comet Hale-Bopp would transport their souls to a higher existence, but only if they exited their vehicle's cult terminology for their bodies. Members aged 26 to 72 consumed phenobarbital mixed with applesauce and vodka, then placed plastic bags over their heads to ensure death. They died in shifts over 3 days, with remaining members cleaning up and preparing bodies before taking their own doses. All wore identical black shirts, sweatpants, and new Nike sneakers, with purple shrouds covering their faces. Each had packed luggage and carried $5 bills and quarters for the journey. Many had been voluntarily castrated years earlier to suppress sexual urges. The cult had funded itself through web design services, and their elaborate website explaining their cosmology remained online. Former members described Applewhite's total psychological control, achieved through isolation, sleep deprivation, and promises of transcendence beyond human existence. Roman amphitheaters transformed death into mass entertainment, where criminals, prisoners of war, and Christians were executed in elaborately staged spectacles before crowds numbering tens of thousands. The damnatio, ad bestias condemnation to beasts, was particularly brutal. Naked prisoners were chained to posts or released into arenas with starved lions, bears, leopards, and other predators specifically kept hungry for weeks. The animals would tear victims apart while spectators cheered, ate, and placed bets. during Emperor Trajan's celebration of his Dacian victory in 178 AD. Official records document 11,000 animals and thousands of prisoners killed over 123 days of continuous games. Executioners designed creative deaths. Prisoners dressed as mythological characters were killed in ways matching their stories. Some were burned alive, dressed as Hercules. Others torn apart by bulls while portraying Europa. Criminals were crucified in the arena, dismembered by horses, or forced to fight as gladiators without training or armor. The Colosseum's drainage system was engineered to wash away massive amounts of blood between events. Rome normalized death as entertainment for centuries. Following President John F. Kennedy's assassination on November 22, 1963, his autopsy was conducted at Bethesda Naval Hospital under chaotic circumstances. The official record states his brain was preserved in formalin for later examination, placed in a stainless steel container, and stored in National Archives security. However, when inventory was taken in 1966, Kennedy's brain had vanished. The missing organ weighs heavily on conspiracy theories because brain examination could definitively prove bullet trajectories, potentially contradicting the single-shooter conclusion. Leading theories suggest Attorney General Robert Kennedy, JFK's brother, secretly took the brain to prevent grotesque public display or hide evidence of JFK's Addison's disease medications. Others speculate government agents removed it to conceal evidence supporting multiple shooters. Medical photographs show significant portions of Kennedy's skull and brain were destroyed by bullets, but without the physical specimen, forensic reanalysis remains impossible. The brain's disappearance eliminated crucial evidence. Just as public skepticism about the Warren Commission's findings intensified, to this day, Kennedy's brain remains missing, along with tissue samples, photographs, and other autopsy materials. The theft represents either a family's desperate attempt at dignity or a sinister cover-up, perhaps both. In July 1518, a woman named Frau Trophia began dancing in Strasbourg's streets and couldn't stop. Within a week, 34 others joined her. By month's end, approximately 400 people were dancing uncontrollably, many collapsing from exhaustion, heart attacks, and strokes. The afflicted danced for days without rest, their feet bleeding, bodies convulsing, unable to stop even when begging for relief. Medieval authorities, believing the condition was caused by hot blood, hired musicians and built a stage, thinking the dancers needed to dance it out of their systems. This made the outbreak worse. Historical records document deaths, though exact numbers remain disputed, with estimates ranging from dozens to over 100 fatalities. Modern researchers theorize the cause was mass psychogenic illness triggered by extreme stress. The region faced famine, disease, and poverty. Others suggest ergot poisoning from moldy rye bread, which contains compounds similar to LSD. The most disturbing accounts describe dancers with vacant expressions, moving mechanically, seemingly possessed. The plague ended as mysteriously as it began in September 1518, leaving survivors traumatized and the city haunted by memories of compulsive dancing corpses in the streets. Between 1936 and 1945, Japanese scientists at Unit 731 in Manchuria conducted experiments so horrific they rival Nazi atrocities, yet remained largely unknown for decades. Commander Shiro Ishii oversaw a facility where at least 10,000 prisoners, Chinese civilians, Soviet POWs, and others were subjected to biological warfare experiments. Victims were infected with plague, anthrax, cholera, and other pathogens, then dissected alive without anesthesia so researchers could observe disease progression in living organs. Prisoners were frozen to study frostbite, then thawed to document tissue death. Vivisections were routine, with conscious victims strapped to tables while surgeons removed organs. Some were placed in pressure chambers until their eyes popped from sockets. Others were spun in centrifuges until death. Pregnant women were infected, to study disease transmission to fetuses. The facility included a prison, laboratories, and crematoria to dispose of body after Japan's surrender. U.S. authorities granted Unit 731 scientists immunity in exchange for their research data, allowing them to escape war crimes prosecution. Most lived prosperous, post-war lives as respected physicians and academics.